With that, I will introduce tonight's speaker. Eliza Trist ventured west 2 decades before Lewis and Clark. But who was she, and who are her descendants? Friend to Thomas Jefferson, Eliza kept a journal that still exists, detailing her 1783 to 1785 adventures west to Pittsburgh and down the Ohio and Mississippi rivers into Spanish-owned territory in Louisiana. This presentation covers her founding friendships, her extensive journey, and her burial and death at Monticello. Discover the extent of genealogical research the speaker conducted to uncover Eliza Trist, her famous descendants, and her lifelong contributions to the development of early America. Karen A. Chase is an author, speaker, and brand designer. For nearly 3 decades, Karen has worked as a professional designer, creating brands for national and international organizations, nonprofits, and authors. She has spoken with nearly 100 historical, corporate, and book club audiences in the United States and in Canada. She is part-time onboard history lecturer with American Cruise Lines, sailing on the East Coast and the Chesapeake. Her first book, Bonjour 40, A Paris Travelogue, garnered 7 independent publishing awards, and her first novel, Carrying Independence, was a nominee for the 2020 Library of Virginia Literary Awards. Historical fiction focusing on the signing of the Declaration of Independence, the novel was awarded number 12 of the 100 Best Indie Books of 2019. In 2024, she published the Travel Journal of Eliza House Trist, 1783 to 1784, a new transcription of a journal kept by the woman who went west and kept a journal for Thomas Jefferson. She is a member of the Albemarle chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Born in Canada, Karen now lives in Richmond with her spouse Ted and 3 scrappy cats. She bikes, gardens, fosters kittens, and travels for research. Please join me in welcoming Karen. You're muted.
Thank
There
you
you go.
so very much. It's wonderful to be with all of you tonight. And
Thanks for
I'm,
coming.
yes, I'm going to share my screen so that we can get into the presentation. And thank you for Karen and Paula for arranging this. And I see a couple of my DAR ladies in the audience there. So hi, everybody. All right. Are we good with the view there? Is it working?
Perfect.
Okay. So tonight we are going to talk about Eliza House Trist, and I'll be pointing out as we go. I know this is a genealogical group, and so I'll be pointing out a lot of the little things we found along the way. And normally I save this to the end, but I just want to tell you that bringing this presentation together, it was really such a massive group effort. You'll see at the end how many different DAR chapters and individuals from those chapters came together to help me piece this together. But it was everyone from DAR to genealogists to people at historical societies, even a neighbor who helped me transcribe a will because it was in French and he was a French teacher. So you'll see that there's quite an effort to get everybody together on this list. So we're talking about Eliza House Trist. Uh, I don't know how many of you are familiar with her at this point, but I know by the end you certainly will be. But who was Eliza Trist? She was born relatively early, 1751, so a good 25, 26 years before the outbreak of the American Revolution. And she was born in Philadelphia to 2 Quakers, Samuel and Mary. We have uh, her birth record, Eliza's birth record there in the bottom right that we've found. Since I began doing this research, some folks at Monticello who I've been in touch with, and you'll understand Monticello more why as we go, helped me find different pieces as it came into their purview. And one of them is this image on the top right, which is the only known photograph we have of Eliza at this point, or image of her. So it was a silhouette that was done when she was probably about 54, we believe. The bulk of the conversation we're going to be talking about tonight, she was in her 20s and 30s. But her parents were, in fact, expelled Quakers. We know this because of notes. As you well know, if you're a good genealogist, you've been in and out of Quaker records. They're very detailed when it comes to who attends which friends' fellowships and who does not, which is part of the reason they were expelled. But they were also expelled due to the fact that Eliza's conception came before their marriage. She had two brothers as well. She Her father survived until Eliza was about 16, and then her father died, leaving her mother quite a good estate. We have been able to find the estate records and even a detailed listing of what it is she received, 2,600 pounds, which at the time was a pretty good sum. And Mary House decided to open an inn with that money. At the time, you may already know that Philadelphia, especially, was very good about this. Many of the colonies were, that widows were able to get licenses to run inns. It kept them off of basically a welfare state. And for many women, it meant they never had to marry again if they didn't want to. And for Mary, she first opened a boarding house that is in that bottom right square there. It was several blocks away from the State House Inn, but the red square that's in the top left is the State House. And when rumblings of revolution started to happen, and the founders that we all know today started coming in and out of Philadelphia, she decided location, location, location. And she moved her inn to where that red star is, just 2 blocks away from the State House Inn, in order to capture more of the men's funds as they came in and out. So, over the time of this project, we've been able to find multiple things, including a tax receipt showing Mary House having paid on John Odemeyer's establishment. We also have a record from Congress of reimbursing Mary House for board and lodging for a gentleman who was a French general who died at the inn during the war. Eliza was helping her mother. She was about 16 at the time that her father died, and she stayed on helping her mother run the house inn. That particular location on 2nd Street, for a while, it used to have an historical marker that was there. It is no longer there, and that marker only mentioned James Madison having stayed at that inn. They removed the marker, removed that particular building, and in its place put up a public restroom for a while, and that too is gone. And the image on the right is basically the slab that is there now. One of my long projects is to get a new marker there indicating that not just James Madison stayed there, but that Eliza and her mother, Mary House, ran that inn together. It was while working at this inn that Eliza met a young man named Nicholas Trist. Nicholas Trist was a British officer, and before the war, it was not uncommon for inns like theirs to house both revolutionaries and redcoats. And Nicholas was over here doing some work on the Western Front. I was coming in and out of Philadelphia with his Royal Regiment of Foot. And it was during this time that he met Eliza. They married in 1774. And then shortly thereafter their wedding, he went up to New York along with the troops. That little snippet of a letter down there is from him writing back to Eliza. He complains in it about having to do nothing but march constantly, and he is tired of it. And he encourages her to come to New York. He's staying in an inn where he is dining with General Greene and others, having his head quite turned about what this revolution means. And when she does go to New York, she's pregnant and she gives birth to their son, who I always apologize for his name. It is Hoare Browse, which were the last names of family members. So the Hoare family and the Browse family. But once his son is born, Nicholas decides he no longer wants to be in the Royal Army and he leaves and retires his regiment. He goes home back to England in order to capture what little monies he can from his family. He comes from a pretty good estate in Devonshire, and I've been very grateful to be in touch with some of the descendants of the Trist family as well, who have talked to me about that estate and that situation over there. He came back to get money. He was unable to come back into Philadelphia because of the rumblings of the war, so he decided that he was going to set up a homestead in Natchez, Louisiana, where many um, retired regiments were going. And it's at that point that they are separated, unfortunately, for the whole duration of the war. Nicholas cannot come back into Philadelphia, and Eliza cannot really go to him yet. Though in 1780, in one of his letters to her that still exists, he says, "You thought you had resolutions enough to undertake the journey. I would have you endeavor to put it into practice." He goes on to encourage her, saying, "You're well connected to some people there at the inn. Perhaps they can help put that trip together for you." And one of those people that she's so well connected to is none other than Thomas Jefferson. He comes in and out of the house inn multiple times as the years go by. And they strike up not only a relationship at the inn, a friendship there, but a letter writing friendship that lasts the whole of their lives. So if you go on to Founders Online today, many people hit this website. Many biographers come to this website when they're writing about the founding fathers. And some of the information they get are from letters from Eliza Trist because she was a prolific writer. She wrote to so many of the founders over the whole of her life for almost 50 years. And I like to say that Thomas Jefferson was quite a good hoarder, and he kept all of her letters and documented when and where they arrived. And those have made it into Founders Online. So you can not only search by Thomas Jefferson, you can search by Eliza Trist or Mrs. Trist or Elizabeth Trist. And when we finally get to the end of the war, Thomas Jefferson writes to Eliza and indicates that the peace treaty has indeed gone through. The Treaty of Paris has gone through. And Eliza writes back to him and says, I'm planning to undertake this journey. We do have other letters from James Madison indicating that Eliza has been preparing for this journey since September of 1783. But she writes in a letter to Thomas Jefferson in December saying she's now determined to go by Pittsburgh, sent off a baggage in a wagon, and purchased a horse for myself. She has arranged for a young woman named Polly to come with her, who I believe now, having pieced together some of this lineage, is actually her mother's niece, so really an equal in terms of age to Eliza. And she's leaving her son in the care of her mother to make this journey to meet up with Nicholas. Uh, Thomas Jefferson writes her back that same month, encouraging her again to go, which is a really remarkable thing that we don't often see Thomas Jefferson and encouraging so many things with women. So saying she'll be distinguished creditor if you pursue your wild Mississippi scheme. And I personally very, very much love the fact that that same month, Thomas Jefferson is also writing to Clark, who we know later goes with Lewis and Clark, that some of us have been talking here, he says in the letter, in a feeble way, of making the attempt to search that country from the Mississippi to California. So in 1783, we know that this is uncharted territory other than by a few early pioneers who have gone west. Eliza does later on write back to Thomas Jefferson in the midst of her journey that whatever observations I'm capable of making, I shall not fail to communicate to you. And we know she has done this by way of this. This is, in fact, the 1783 journal. For those of you who've been in and out of archives lately with fragile papers like this, you will know that I should not have gloves on when I do this. They asked me not to in order to make sure I didn't tear the paper. It's very fragile. In fact, I could see it flaking onto the desk as I was working through the journal. But you notice I have the word diary crossed off. This is a very important distinction here because this is not something that Eliza is keeping for herself. She is keeping a journal and editing it to make sure that it is clear what she is seeing and what type of people she's meeting and what type of rock formation she is seeing. So it is very much a journal that is for someone else's eyes. This is currently housed here in Virginia. at UVA in the Albert and Shirley Small collection within the Jefferson and Trist papers. I'm going to take you briefly through Eliza's journey here so you can get a sense of where it was that she went during this period. So first, this is just, I'll break it into three parts to make it more manageable. Philly to Pittsburgh, Pittsburgh to the Falls of the Ohio, and the Falls of the Ohio down to Natchez, Louisiana. Now, this Philly to Pittsburgh piece, she's not alone. She does have a guide. And keep in mind, this is Eliza. She's been in these fantastic inns in Philadelphia. Her mother's inn was known for fine entertainments, great linens, great conversation, good food. She's only ever been to one other place, and that is New York, where she also stayed in a fine establishment with her husband. So, setting off on this journey, her guide is a gentleman named Mr. Fowler, who lives in Pittsburgh with his wife. And he was also in that Royal Regiment and resigned his commission along with Nicholas. Now they head out, and for Eliza, in some instances, she's lucky enough to stay in places like the Sign of the Bear Tavern, which still exists in Elizabethtown, Pennsylvania. Sometimes, however, she is not, and she is camping along the way. She's staying in establishments wherever they can break for the night, some better known than others. She's making some comments in her journal that they're a little bit more formal here at the beginning in this first passage. It's day by day accounting of where they're going, which is wonderful. And but it is more formal. It's just not a lot of personal impressions about the landscapes or things like that. However, there are some personal impressions, some detailed reports about a few things along the way, like whether or not a river is navigable by raft and how many huts are erected within a particular fort. But it's her personal observations at the beginning that are just, they're so indicative of a woman that hasn't traveled very much and certainly not roughly. Just so dirty, I would have rather have slept outdoors. She's encountering families that have been out here for a long, long time on their own. Comfortable supper of fat bacon fried and some coffee. I ate a lot better tonight having jambalaya. I can't imagine this. But these last two statements she makes here, a tumble that hurt her a good deal, and Mr. Fowler up to his middle in the snow, is because of a letter she missed. As you know, Thomas Jefferson was very good at watching the weather, and he sent a letter to the House Inn in Philadelphia advising Eliza to wait until April to go. And she misses that letter by 2 days. And consequently, they are thrust into a horrific snowstorm with plummeting temperatures. And the horses are losing their fat. Her saddle is sliding off. Mr. Fowler has to come to her aid a few times. And Eliza is so cold and so miserable at one point, she writes that she's glad they are moving through the dark and she's behind Mr. Fowler, so he cannot see her crying. And I think I would not be much better. And I would probably say, as Eliza does here, if I escape with my life, you shall hear from me from another route, because of how long this leg takes. Today, it would take us about 7 hours, but for Eliza and Mr. Fowler and Polly on horseback, it was 21 days across that small stretch of land. When she finally does get to Pittsburgh, the Monongahela, the Ohio, and the Allegheny are all frozen solid, and she is stuck in Pittsburgh to wait out until the rivers thaw. She's also waiting here because of a flatboat that was being prepared for her, and the men preparing the boat and building the boat are having some difficulty. She does go and review the boat at one point, and then she waits it out. And we see a real stop in her journal. There's even an X where she marks the spot on which she stopped writing for a while. And it's just indicative of a life she's not used to in Pittsburgh. It's a very stinky town at this point, Pittsburgh. They are really blocked off from Philadelphia society, and so everything is done there. The tannery, the slaughterhouses, everything are right there in the middle of Pittsburgh. But finally, in May, the boat and she and Mr. Fowler's probably had enough of this couch surfer, are ready for her to go. And she sets off on part two of her journey from Pittsburgh down to the falls of the Ohio. So at this point, she leaves Mr. Fowler behind, and she and Polly board a boat. And according to the journal, we can see at least 6 men that are on the boat with them. They are delivering flour, barrels of flour, into the Mississippi Territory. In his earlier letter, Nicholas even encourages her to bring flour. He also encourages her to bring a looking glass because he's so poor he's been shaving in a bucket of water. But the boat on the left is kind of a small version of the one that Eliza would have been on. This is also much smaller than the ones that Lewis and Clark took. It is a bottom barrel boat, so they can put barrels into the bottom of the boat. It has a sail so they can hoist it in good weather. It has spots where they can hook oars in, and the men can row them to shore in extreme situations. And also, there is a covered piece in the back, and that is where Polly and Eliza indicate that they roll out their bedrolls at night to sleep, and they roll them up during the day and sit on them like sofas. So as she sets off on this leg, it really is, she's moving swifter, and you can see that in the writing a little bit more. And she's talking about some of the things she's doing while the men are off hunting on shore. She's gathering wild ginger. She's making notations in the book. There are no illustrations in the book, but she's certainly making notations of the different vegetation she's seeing. We know later from Lewis and Clark expeditions that they did a lot of research and communication with other groups who had gone west before they did to understand what they should be looking for. And Eliza's a very good gardener. Later on in life, even, Thomas Jefferson makes a note in his gardening book that the cherry trees at Monticello are doing very well with the seeds Mrs. Trist brought back from the Mississippi. She makes notes about the different sites that she encounters, along with limestone, for instance. At this point, this is where sometimes your genealogy sends you down a big hole of understanding what's going on in a time period so that you can get more information. At this particular time, they're getting a lot of their millstones sent in from France. I was doing some research about this particular time period along with another DAR lady who is happening to look for French millstone information because of her ancestors. So we were kind of tag teaming at the Jefferson Library trying to see if we could see each other's work as well as our own, which is always a good idea. And there are some indications of what she missed as well. This painting that you see here is by Charles Wilson Peale of them exhuming the mammoth bones from the Ohio at the time. And Eliza makes a note in her journal that she is disappointed that she is not going to be able to go in because it's at least 3 miles from the river to go into this place, and she can't have a guide. But I love this word that she uses, curiosity. It's the first time she uses it. So we see her having turned from someone who is running an inn, efficient and high class situations, suddenly on the road, experiencing things and learning about new things for the first time and being disappointed when she misses them. If you go to Monticello today, you will see some of those mammoth bones in the lobby of Monticello. This is a relatively short ride compared to her first leg of the journey. It's still 8 days long. And as the men on the flower boat are coming into what is present-day Louisville, they crack up on a soundbar and they damage some of the boat. So they spend 8 days in Louisville with Henry Lewis, or General Taylor, pardon me, on his plantation, awaiting their time to leave. This particular image on the right was by Henry Lewis in 1854. Who made much of the same journey that Eliza had, but he was quite a good illustrator. So he illustrated some of the very same spots that Eliza mentioned. And that's why when I look at a situation like Eliza's life, it's really important to look at what other people do in those same areas later on because there may be mention and crossover. Unfortunately, there was not with Henry Lewis, but at least I could get a visual on what potentially Eliza was seeing, minus the steamboat, of course. But after the boat is finally fixed, she's in the final leg of her journey to go down the falls, from the falls of the Ohio. So she is leaving here, as you will see, at the beginning of June, and she's heading down the falls of the Ohio, from the falls of the Ohio all the way down the Mississippi River. Because of that missed weather opportunity, and had she waited until April to leave, she would have still encountered the same things that she's encountering on the Mississippi. And I think part of the reason that they were leaving in early December was hoping to catch a weather window. So when they hit the Mississippi River, they'd be at the end of a season coming down the Mississippi, which means it would have been much more manageable. You wouldn't have had all those early spring rains and all the winter runoff. But as a result of all the delays, she's caught in the middle of all that. And Eliza's best comment from this whole thing is, I do not like this river. It's a very fast-moving river. It meanders significantly, but she does encounter some unusual people for Eliza's standpoint along this way. And this is another important thing when you start looking at some of the people she's encountering. Are there other accounts that they have that corroborate what she has seen? But for instance, she stops and spends some time with a family who's been out in this area for almost two full generations. And she says that the 18-year-old daughter in the family looks as though she hasn't been washed the whole of her life. So it's a very big departure from the way Eliza has grown up. They meet, as Eliza describes her, a mulatto woman. They are hunting as they go. They are often in want of fresh vegetables, and this woman loads them up with as much as she can from their garden. And she shares a lot of her history with Eliza and the men of the flower boat. And Eliza describes her as saying, she has many good virtues, but chastity is not among them. She also meets various Native American, indigenous people who are living in these areas. Sometimes they are very fearful of what is happening, and the men have Polly and Eliza hide within the middle of the flour barrels. At another point, a chief is starting to row toward them in the fog, and they're worried that he is the one that has been noted for scalping many people. But as he comes closer, his wife and child are in the canoe with him. And so Eliza and the men of the flower boat invite them up onto the boat. They share rum, they share stories as best they can. Eliza offers a handkerchief to the woman to shield the baby's face from sun. And Eliza's head is quite turned about what the interactions are like. And she sees this more as a family and a parting of friends. But she does say, we did share rum with them, for it is good to have friends at court. So she understands the politics of the area as well. But it is mid-July, mid-June, going into July. If anyone has ever been down in the Mississippi area, you know full well that there are mosquitoes. And she and Polly look like they have smallpox, according to Eliza. They do see amazing creatures like the white pelican that is on its migration route. This is significant to me because the pelican summers in northern Saskatchewan, where my parents grew up, and it migrates down through the Mississippi and it winters in Sanibel Island, where I saw it many years later. So I feel like I've hit all three parts. Eliza helped close that loop for me. She's also delighted by different formations she gets to see and to document, to take back, like the natural formations inside of a cave in the big rock in Ohio. They still take school groups into this cave. I would bet all the money in my bank account that they do not mention the fact that Eliza was one of the first white women to see inside of these caves. I traveled so much with my family as a kid, and I remember being in the Lewis and Clark caves and told about how they were some of the first to see inside a cave. And now I know Eliza predates them by 2 decades. So part three here, she really has moved, I'm sorry, she really has moved a long way in 31 days. It takes a long stretch coming down the Mississippi River, and sometimes they thought they were taking shortcuts and the river doubled back on itself. Sometimes they had to pull over because of whirlpools. The boat almost goes down in a whirlpool at one point. There's so many harrowing moments along this part of the journey that she is very relieved to be in sight of the Natchez. On July 1st, she says she's really 3 days away. Her journey most complete. I shall be happy in sight of the Natchez. Will write to Mr. Trist. Perhaps a boat may be just setting off, and he'll be glad to meet me, I know. It is a wonderful moment for Eliza to know that she's so close to Nicholas after 8 long years of separation. And unfortunately, we know now about what happened during that time she is traveling down. So, way back in May, about the point that Eliza was at the Falls of the Ohio, she does not know that a letter has passed her by and gone to her mother in Philadelphia. Thomas Jefferson writes to James Madison about that letter and about that moment. And he writes news of the day. They talk about books. And then in the third paragraph of Thomas Jefferson's letter, he says to James Madison, poor Mrs. Trist does not know that her husband died in February. We do know now from later accounts of her telling her granddaughter-in-law that a rider came out from Natchez and told Eliza about Nicholas's death. He had died in early February, and basically of yellow fever or typhoid. And what ends up happening, Eliza collapses, and when she comes to several days later, they realize that Eliza has to, she realizes that she has to settle in a state. And so now she has a fourth and even longer journey ahead of her. So instead of reuniting with Nicholas, thank goodness he had the wherewithal to leave a will in those last few days that he was alive. It looks like it's on an everyday notepad that we would use. He leaves everything to her, everything in the estate, and the estate has not been growing at the rate that they all would have hoped. But he has, we don't know whether or not Eliza would have known about it. He did, in fact, purchase 3 slaves to work with him on the estate, and those are part of the estate sale. And Eliza really, she has to look out for herself and Polly and ultimately her son. So she tries to navigate this whole estate system, but the county seat is down there in New Orleans. So she goes down to New Orleans, and it is almost a year of back and forth before she is able to settle this estate and get things moving. When she finally does settle the estate and the items are sold, now she has to get home. She purchases passage on a boat that's going to go all the way to New York, but the day that she's supposed to set sail, something is awry with the boat hull and it needs to be fixed. So she just says, I'm just purchasing tickets to Jamaica and I'll figure it out from there. So she gets to Jamaica and she figures it out again and she purchases tickets to Cuba. And from Cuba, she purchases tickets to get them to New York and back home on a carriage ride on that same original carriage road that she rode out when she was pregnant with Horbrowse in the beginning. So she's gone 2 years, so many miles, 2,500 nautical miles on top of it. And, I can't help but think that there is an influence here on what happened with Lewis and Clark, a combination of things. One of them is this letter from 1801, where she writes to Thomas Jefferson, and there's a postscript, please remember me to my dear friend Captain Lewis. But there is another factor here, and Eliza, for many years later in her life, lived here in Virginia. After her mother closed the inn and her mother had died, she moved here to Virginia, and she stayed on the estates of Monticello and the Monroes and the Madisons. And she was kind of a couch surfer going from home to home. And she stayed with the Gilmers in Charlottesville at a estate called Farmington. And the neighboring farm, an older gentleman was having his nephew help him settle the estate. And that nephew was, in fact, Meriwether Lewis. Some of the notes that I have seen from earlier researchers suggest that Meriwether Lewis might have made a copy of his journal for Eliza. So there are many things out there, I think, to gather for Eliza still. I rarely have to share with people why I believe Eliza matters after they hear this story because it's to see a woman, it doesn't matter why she went. It doesn't matter how much her documentation influenced others. The fact that she went at all and did it in a dress is just remarkable to me. But she does matter also because she's a founding figure, and this is where so much of the genealogy, when I study people like this, it's one thing to make family trees, but making those stories and understanding the greater story of a person and the people they interacted with and how that affected their lives is so significant. And in Eliza's case, it led to a family connection with a founding figure. Eliza's grandson, Nicholas P. Trist, married Jefferson's granddaughter. And so, all the descendants, if you know anyone that is in the Monticello Association who is descended from Virginia Jefferson Randolph, they are also a direct descendant of Eliza Trist. And having talked with a custodian who works at Monticello in the graveyard there, when I was in there with him and we were looking at it, he too was related to Eliza and did not know it because it's just so overshadowed by Jefferson so much of the time. The other reason it is overshadowed is because Eliza does die at Monticello. She dies 2 years after this wedding, or 4 years after this wedding, 2 years after Thomas Jefferson has died, and the estate's in arrears, and there is no headstone for Eliza. Virginia writes to Nicholas and begs for the money to have a headstone erected for his grandmother, and he refuses because he doesn't have it, he says. So my task going forward here is to see if we can get a proper burial marker established for Eliza, for the record does in fact show she is buried at Monticello. But, when I'm working on something like that and having to prove lineage, all of my research was kind of culminating, and then the pandemic happened, and you're locked out of archives, and you try to regroup and say, which small tasks can you do instead? And for me, working with other people is what seems to make this Eliza project proceed. And Patty Arwood, who is on here, is one such person who is part of the big hunt for lineage pieces for Eliza. Because she wrote to so many people, and because she was a woman, so many of her documents are scattered in multiple locations. And so that required the help of a number of people. The DAR chapters that I reached out to who hunted and searched through genealogy records, Charlottesville, Richmond, Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, New Orleans, Vermont, even Maine was in on the action for a while. Being a DAR, I wanted to prove that Eliza and or her mother were original patriots that supported the cause. Along the way, we had the really great fortune of finding that little piece you saw at the beginning, that tax bill that Mary House paid on the inn on John Odemeyer's building. And that was the thing that the DAR needed to prove that she had paid a tax during the years that went to pay off the revolution. And therefore that established Mary. But I also had the unfortunate problem of if I'm going to prove Mary House, I have to attach her to a living descendant who is in the DAR. And unbelievably, through the Virginia Jefferson Randolph line, there was not one. So we went hunting everywhere we could. For a while, as Patty knows, we were talking with some people up in Maine, hoping that a woman named Ellen Thorndike in Maine was the one. I even had a DAR lady go knock on a door, and she said the house was empty, so I knew that wasn't it. And then I found a notation of a woman named Ellen Thorndike as the descendant who, in her engagement notice in the newspaper, it said she was a descendant of Thomas Jefferson. So I was pretty sure I had the right woman this time in Vermont, in Stowe, Vermont. And I found a real estate listing and I called, and I got her voicemail and I left that very ridiculous voicemail of, "Hi, you may be related to Thomas Jefferson, and if you are, you're also related to this other woman. I'm not crazy. Can you please call me back?" And she did not call me back. Uh, and then a few days later, literally a few days later, I'm on a walk with my neighbor. And I said, "Tell me anything good. How's your sister doing in the Florida Keys?" And she said, "My sister hated the Florida Keys. She sold that house and she bought a house in Stowe, Vermont." And I said, "Can you please have her go down to this woman's work and tell her I'm not nuts? Show her the picture. Your sister knows me." And so she did, and I ended up on the phone with Ellen that afternoon. And I told her a brief review of what you've seen tonight. And there was this long pause, and Ellen said, "I will absolutely join the DAR, and I will absolutely help you fill in the rest of this lineage because my grandfather told everyone in this family that the women in my family did nothing of consequence." And she said that you have helped me change the narrative of my family. And this is Ellen and all of her lineage pieced together, signing into the DAR as a member. A pretty big moment considering I'm not related to any of these people. But it really is true that it takes a village to do this kind of work. I think when we silo ourselves off to do genealogy work, it can be a very quiet affair that takes a long time. I think many hands make light work, if I want to keep adding idioms in here. But it's also a great joy. Nothing seems to move with the Eliza Project when I'm doing it on my own, but when other people come in, there is an Eliza magic that happens. And it's really about fleshing out more of her story than just my own. Of course, for the DAR, they were thrilled. It's like the trifecta. It's Thomas Jefferson, it's a new woman patriot, it's a new member. Um, and on top of it, Eliza becomes what we call a real daughter, which is the very first daughter born to an original patriot. For me, it's a very personal story. I traveled, as I mentioned, a lot with my family in an RV every summer, 8 to 10 weeks every summer as a kid. And that's a picture of my family there on the left. My brother and I are wearing what were called Lewis and Clark jackets. I would like to think if for decades and generations we'd all been told Eliza's story first, maybe my brother would be wearing a dress and I'd be out front looking like I was taking charge. But it was also one of those, you never know why it is that you're called to do some of the genealogy work that you do. And for me, seeing Eliza's journal was just magnetic. The image in the middle are the journals that I've kept for years, the exact same size, same shape, same construction as Eliza's. I had no idea. And yeah, I do a lot of traveling in my life, and I'd like to think that myself and younger generations would see themselves differently if Eliza's story was there. I love this gutsy traveler quote. The adventure traveler is not a 28-year-old male, but a 47-year-old female, and she wears a size 12 dress. It's perfect, right? I hope you'll share Eliza's story. This isn't just about, birth, death, and marriage, but about contributing in a different way. And word and reference choices are important here, talking about a journal, not a diary. How we associate her with history, that Eliza really was that expansion explorer, historian. Her documentation exists. She didn't get to go and present that in front of the Philosophical Society. Lewis and Clark chose not to. So at that particular moment in history, they were in the same boat in terms of what they were sharing with the greater world. And I hope you'll see from this presentation what I did and what Eliza's even own exploration brought to her. I had no idea there were such beings upon this earth. I do have autographed copies and things like that through my website, but uh, and the Travel Journal of Eliza Trist has just a small foreword and introduction for me, and it is a full, new, and original transcription of the journal. It was originally transcribed in about 2000. But the woman who did it put in punctuation and edited it wherever she wanted to. And this is a faithful transcription page by page of Eliza's journey instead. So I thank you so much for inviting me and share this. And I'm happy to skip back through some of the genealogical work that we did, some of the research, what it was we were finding, and certainly answer any questions you might have about dear old Eliza.
Okay, we've got a couple in the chat box already, and I'm sure people are probably typing as we speak. But Anne asks, do you have any K-12 learning resources developed around the story? Would love to help develop some if you do
Hmm.
not. This would be helpful to teachers across Virginia and beyond.
Oh,
And
I
then
do
she
not yet.
she adds, we are currently working with Monticello on other resources as well.
Oh, I would love that. I would absolutely love that. You can write me at info@karenhs.com and we'll start going because there's so much more to do with Eliza. At this point, I just want to also add the project post proof for the DAR really is taken off, and I had an assistant that I was working with who was in a program here at VCU, and she loves spreadsheets, so she helped me develop this huge spreadsheet regarding every document we could find for Eliza. We numbered documents, we numbered all the people within the documents, and we've cross-referenced those to build this big database. And we have over 200 documents related to Eliza at this point, and it's growing.
Wow. Which leads me into the next question. David had asked, when you do research like this, how do you capture these facts and events to tell the Trist story? What tools do you use? How do you organize it to stay on top of what you've discovered?
Yeah,
Spreadsheet probably is part of it, I'm sure.
it's a big part of it. This spreadsheet really did help. Certainly, sometimes crafting the story like this, really sitting down and building a PowerPoint story like the one I just showed you, really does help. Um, I've written novels that are historical that take place over the course of the year, and having also developed corporate brands that I work on for 2 or 3 years. Um, I'm very detailed in my documentation of where I'm getting sources from, and I tend to not keep as much in paper as I used to, honestly. It's easier for me to go back and see citations with links, which are in that spreadsheet. That's very helpful. But the story itself, telling it to people is a big factor in making sure you have those details correct. And writing out stories, writing blogs, writing posts about it helps solidify some of that material in your mind as you're going. Because I think the story is one thing. I do have you can find it on my YouTube page. I do have a presentation on researching women, and how there are columns of information that I kind of look in, friends and family, associations they're part of, it's neighborhoods they've lived in. And by contrast, I also have a similar document to me of historians that I've talked to. I keep an ongoing spreadsheet of the people that I've talked to about the project so that I can keep going back to them, because there's nothing worse than looking at your phone and going, was that a Lisa or Eliza or a Leslie? So it's really important to keep that documentation of who you talk to about which piece of information too. So it's a lot of trails in that regard. But yeah, storytelling really helps you realize that that person that you're researching was in fact a person with their own human story, as opposed to just the details of who died and who was born and who was married.
Absolutely. Thank you, Karen, for sharing such a great presentation. It is both
Mhm.
inspiring and sad at the same time. There are so many unsung women in history.
So many, so many. Yeah. I'm just watching that. I just finished watching that Lydia Poet series on Netflix that's loosely based on her life. And every time I think about all the women that are not included. And that was Eliza's case too, working on my novel. I kept, as I was looking at primary sources, I kept coming across Eliza in the footnotes. They were things like, as written in a letter to Eliza Trist, as written from Eliza Trist to Thomas Jefferson. I'm like, who's this woman in the footnotes who's writing to all the founders? And some of it, honestly, is having the curiosity, and I'm preaching to the choir when it comes to genealogists, having the curiosity that sends you down a rabbit hole for a couple days because you never know where that is going to lead in terms of circling back around, either to a person in modern day who can help you or you know, another entity from that time period that may have more information about your subject.
Yes, reading the footnotes and the citations can always lead you to amazing new directions for sure.
Amazing. I mean, the letter I referenced that Thomas Jefferson wrote to James Madison about poor Mrs. Trist does not know her husband has died. I read it in a footnote in some other paper about Thomas Jefferson and James Madison writing letters to one another. And it was such an integral part of understanding when her husband died, what the impact was on people back in Philadelphia, how Thomas Jefferson sent letters to the Falls to try catch her, and he just missed her again with another set of letters. Like there were so many pieces in that one little footnote to fleshing out the story. And I tend to think of things, cinematically. What would that scene be like in a movie of everybody back in Philadelphia finding out what Eliza does not know?
Perhaps you should make such a movie.
Working on it.
Right. Anne says, will do about emailing you. Can you put that in the chat so I can save it, which I will do right now.
Yeah.
She says, also working on state study guides for the Virginia standards and the state atlas. So this would push out to teachers across the state.
Fabulous. That'd be great. Eliza needs to be there. Thank you, Anne. I look forward to talking with you.
Crystal says, excellent. You would be great on history camp discussing your book.
I have been on history camp, but not for this book yet. Thank you.
David says, fantastic presentation. I heard you do the same presentation in
Yes.
the library in Chesterfield County, but I was absolutely enthralled again with your storytelling. Keep it up.
Oh, thank you, David. Yes. I think you're the reason I'm here, aren't you?
Yeah, Karen's nodding.
Yes.
Karen's big nodding.
hmm
And Alicia says, great presentation. This story would make a good documentary.
It would. It would. I mean, I'm working on it. That's all I can say. I'm working on what I can do for Eliza to get her story lifted up more than it is. That woman deserves to be out of the footnotes in a big way.
Yes. And then Anne adds, or feature film.
Or feature film. I'm going with feature film. Netflix series, 4 parts.
There you go. Excellent.
Yeah.
She said, yes.
Yeah, that's why I always say to everybody on here, if you know anyone in Netflix or, if you know Greta Gerwig who did Little Women, please let me know. It's worth saying.
On that note, that is it for the questions, unless anybody has a last minute question. But Anne says, I do know documentary filmmakers, so you never know. So, y'all are going to have a lot to talk about, apparently.
We are going to have a lot to talk about, Anne. I'll watch out for your email for sure. And we'll get a time on the phone where we can really talk.
Excellent.
Yeah, if I leave you with any parting information from my perspective is that genealogy is more than just about facts. It is about story. And it doesn't take a long time to sit down and just say into your phone what you're researching that day in terms of a story. So you get your head around those pieces too. So it's, leave yourself voicemail messages or whatever to get yourself motivated on those stories. They're so significant in terms of past lives when we're looking at people, as evidenced by Ellen. I mean, Ellen Thorndike's comment to me was, it made all the research worthwhile to know that I changed the narrative of a family. That's
yes.
No amount of
that was
birth, death, and
amazing.
marriage will do that. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you very much for speaking with us and coming here this evening, and we greatly appreciate it.
Thank you so very much.
Oh, one more. Bridget says, thank you so much. This was interesting. I taught political science 1985 to 2021 and should have read more books like the travel journals.
Yes. Yes. Well, it's out there. So read and share her story.
Excellent. Thank you very much. And
Thank you so much, Paul
thanks
and
everyone for
Karen.
attending, and
Thank you,
everybody
Karen.
have a good evening.
Thank you all. Bye, Patty. Bye, Sharon. Bye, David.